And I had been knocking myself out my whole life to be cool, to be good enough, to please my parents, to, somehow feel that I was worthy enough. And all of a sudden I'm engulfed and infused and overwhelmed and saturated with this love. And like people like to say, or I like to say, if the strongest love I've ever felt on earth is a candle, this is the sun. Like, it's just so much more powerful. And the only limit is how much can I feel, not how much is there.
Hello, thank you for tuning in. My name is Nella, and welcome to my podcast, Ethereality. Today's guest is Louisa Peck. She's going to tell us about her near-death experience and, as she puts it, her journey from being a die-hard atheist to full-on woo-woo. Really quick before we begin, if you love near-death experience content and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, go ahead and do that right now. And let's get into it. Louisa, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you start by sharing with us the experience that really started this whole journey?
Okay. I had a near-death experience in 1982 when I was 22. I was an atheist, and I was a really strong-willed atheist. I very strongly believed there was nothing besides the material world. And I was also an alcoholic, and I was also from an alcoholic home. And so I really thought that if I could just feel cool enough, it would fill that hole in my gut where I just always felt like I wasn't enough, always felt like I was falling short no matter what I did. I was not morally in a good place then. I had graduated college, done really well, and I didn't know what to do with myself afterwards. So I moved to New York City because it seemed to me kind of the mecca of coolness, because this is where the clubs were, and the Frank Sinatra, if you can make it here, you make it anywhere. And so I moved there, but really it was so that I could have an excuse to be close to my secret boyfriend. But then the secret boyfriend broke up with me, and this date that I went on was with my secret boyfriend's best friend, while the secret boyfriend had broken up with me. Anyway, it was very complicated. So this best friend had been a coke dealer in college, and so a lot of the reason I asked him to come to New York to see me was hopes that he'd bring cocaine, which he did. And so we did a bunch of it before we left the apartment. We did a bunch of it in the taxi, and then we continued doing it while we were there. There was the Peppermint Lounge, which was, to me, the coolest nightclub I had found in New York. It was new wave, and I liked the Greenwich Village vibe, and I just felt like I'd sort of hit the jackpot in terms of nightclubs there. So when all the cocaine was gone, we started coming down, and I did not want to come down. I felt like I was looking good, I was dancing well. I just refused to just come back to normal life. So we put together the money we had. We asked around if anybody had cocaine, and we bought what this guy told us was a gram of cocaine. We put it on our lips and it numbed them. So we thought, okay, it is cocaine, and bought it, and he disappeared. But when we snorted the cocaine, it did nothing. If you have done cocaine, you know that within a few seconds of snorting, you feel fabulous and smart and charming and all the things that cocaine does for a person. This was doing none of that. It was like, wah, wah. And so my date, being something of a connoisseur, he just threw down his bill that he was snorting with, said, this is crap, I'm getting nothing. And I just thought, well, didn't it numb our lips and numb our gums? So I'll just snort the whole pile, and even if it's crappy, maybe I'll get a little bit high. So that's what I did. I snorted the whole pile. I did not know until many years later, after I got sober, after I made friends with a lot of drug dealers who were sober and told them about what happened to me. They said, that was not cocaine that you bought. We used to, in the 80s, cut cocaine with lidocaine, which is an anesthetic, because it's much cheaper. and it sounds like you were still pure lidocaine. So it doesn't take a lot of lidocaine to get lidocaine poisoning. It shuts down your central nervous system. Usually it's used topically to kind of numb the nerves on your skin, but if you ingest it, it will actually start to numb the nerves that run your body. So I yelled in my friend's ear that I was going to the bathroom. In line for the bathroom, I began to notice that I was getting tunnel vision. I didn't understand that my brain was not getting enough oxygen because my heart was slowing down. I wasn't afraid. I just thought, what a cool side effect this is. Why have I never had this before? And I still thought that what I'd snorted was bad cocaine. And then when I got in the stall and I couldn't even read any of the graffiti, that's when I realized something was wrong. Also, it seemed to me to be getting darker and darker because my brain was not getting oxygen. I started to get oxygen starvation. So I was breathing as hard as I could, but with my heart going down into the 40 beats per minute, 30 beats per minute and lower, it just wasn't getting to my brain. I came out of the bathroom, somehow found my date, and I just grabbed him and said, there's no air in here, there's no air in here. And he was like, calm down, calm down. So he took me to the bar and the bartender gave me a glass of water and I felt angry. This is sort of, I've heard oxygen starvation leads to these feelings of anger. So I just thought, well, to make them happy, I'll take a sip. What happened on this side was that I flipped over backwards, fell on the floor, had a grand mal seizure, had a cardiac arrest, did not respond to CPR for over 3 minutes. What happened on my side was that I thought I'd hit my chin on the bar. I felt like a physical blow under my chin and I thought, did I slip? And then it was like I'd been punched in a cartoon, in a Popeye cartoon or something, and I just flew up into the air. And I flew up so fast like a bullet, and I just had a feeling of Manhattan receding below me. And my thought was, oh, what relief to leave behind all that nonsense. So that's how I felt about leaving.
Did you feel that clarity of sobriety as soon as you left your body?
I felt more than sobriety, right? I felt more than that. I felt better than I've ever achieved in any kind of meditation. I felt like pure me. And I wasn't really questioning it because I just felt like so much kind of had already fallen away from me. And it felt like I had been kind of playing a game down there and now I didn't have to, I'd been excused. So I was shooting up and next thing I know, I'm shooting into a clear blue sky. And I have no more even memory really of having been starved for oxygen, but it still just felt so nice to be in this pure, clear air. And I got this playful little thought because I was still me. And in this life anyway, I had been a ballet dancer. And so I thought, I bet I can bend over backwards and do like a swan dive. And below me was the ocean. And the ocean looked pure and blue. And it just went from horizon to horizon, blue sky, blue ocean, perfect. And so I did this back bend, and I can even remember feeling, wow, I aced that. Like I can remember these little human thoughts that I had. And then I was diving toward the ocean and I had not fear because I felt there is no use for fear on the other side. Fear is to keep you in your body. But I just thought, hey, don't you like hit it like concrete if you come down on water at great speed? And I just thought, well, we'll find out. That's all I thought about that. And so I did a perfect dive, which is not me at all. And I'm terrible at swimming and diving. Anyway, I shot down into the water. And then my concern, though I wasn't worried, again, I just thought, wow, the surface is way up there. But it was beautiful because the surface was dappled with sunlight and the bubbles were rising around me. And everything had that jewel-like quality of underwater beauty. But then I surfaced, no problem. And I just thought that was easy. Then I saw land and a beach that was not tropical. It was more like the beaches around here in the Pacific Northwest with trees beyond it. Anyway, I wanted to be there. I swam for like time isn't the same, but I just made the decision to swim. And then sort of next thing I knew, I was wading through the waves onto the beach. And again, I just thought that was easy. And I looked down the beach and I saw a house that was up on a mesa, or sort of like a sea stack, which we have here and on the Oregon coast where the land is eroded away. Up on that mesa was an old house, and I got excited when I saw it. I knew it had to do with me and I wanted to be there. So zip, I'm not there. I'm at the bottom of the mesa this time. And I kind of thought, okay, but I can do things. I'm really capable. I'm really strong. I had this kind of nothing's going to stop me attitude. But there was a bunch of rocks there and they were covered with this repulsive green slime. I don't remember a smell per se, but I remember thinking, this is putrid. This is rotten. This is gross. And it's all my grossness, right? I told you about how I was morally, right? I'm going past that. I climbed above it. But when I got to the door sill, I had lost my body. And again, I just kind of thought, this is a bummer. I don't quite understand why I'm this far from the door sill, but it's not going to stop me from going in. All I was at that point was a subjective camera. And I could move the subjective camera where I wanted, but I did not have a skeleton or anything like that to move around. So I went over the door sill. The first thing that struck me was I was very close to the wood. I could see the grain of it. I could see it had been walked on 1,000,000 times. And I understood as soon as I was in there that all my ancestors had gone this same way. And we had worn the wood down to that kind of powdery consistency. In real life, I did not know anything, care anything about my ancestors or extended family. It was kind of part of the alcoholic family that we just were not very connected. But on the other side, it just meant the world to me. I cared, I loved them, I felt honored to be going where they had gone. And I could feel my paternal grandfather, who I had never known because he died before I was born. He was the most stoked that I was there. He was excited, and he was excited to meet me. I didn't see them. I could just feel them, almost like they were around the house, not in it, around the exterior of it, and just full of anticipation and excited to welcome me. But my sense was that there was supposed to be a chair that looked out this big bay window facing the ocean, and that everybody who came through got to sit there and look at the beauty of the ocean. But here I was, this tall, plus the chair was not there. And so I felt chipped. I felt like, this is no fair. How am I gonna see the view? I wanna see it. And as soon as I thought, I wanna see it, all my movements before this had been my idea. This was not my idea. Something grabbed me by the sternum, even though I didn't have a body, that sense you have of where your heart is, and pulled me over the surface of the floor. And I was thinking, whoa. And I got close to the wall, and then we went up, and I'm like, what's happening? And we went over the windowsill and out over the ocean. And I was flying and I was zooming. It felt fantastic. I mean, what do people seek when they want to go fast on a motorcycle? That sense of zooming through space. And then I was going toward the sun in this gorgeous sunset all around me, reflected on the water. I was following the path that the sun extended across the water.
At this point, are you still being pulled?
Yes, I'm not doing it. I don't even, I mean, it doesn't really feel like it's coming from my sternum anymore. It just feels like I'm zooming, but I don't know how it's happening. So I have this cynical thought, like, wait a minute, people can't fly. This is a little too perfect, you know? Is this real? When I thought, is this real? Then a voice answered me, and I did not hear it. I knew it. It was telepathy, and it was a very powerful voice that said, more real than anything back there. And by back there, it meant back on earth, back in that life. And I felt like, you're right. It is more real I got to agree with you there. I didn't know I wasn't alone, but yeah, I got to agree with you. So I was getting closer and closer to the sun. And again, I had a fearless wondering, aren't I going to vaporize? I'm getting awfully close to the sun. I could see, what do you call it? The corona kind of shifting on it. So I just thought, again, we'll wait and see. And then all of a sudden, before I expected it, I passed through this kind of veil or filament. I felt a sense of passing through something. And then I was inside the sun.
Ooh.
In the sun was the light. I knew I was in the sun, and I thought this light was of the sun, but it was also felt so amazing, and I could feel it was love. And I had been knocking myself out my whole life to be cool, to be good enough, to please my parents, to, somehow feel that I was worthy enough. All of a sudden I'm engulfed and infused and overwhelmed and saturated with this love. Or I like to say, if the strongest love I've ever felt on earth is a candle, this is the sun. Like, it's just so much more powerful. And the only limit is how much can I feel, not how much is there, right? And I began to be aware of a parent figure. I sensed it as a parent. I sensed it as someone holding me like I was an infant, which a lot of NDEers, not a lot, but I've talked to several other people who had the same experience of being cradled as an infant and having the parent just pour in all this love. You are so loved. You are so loved. And I just wanted to stay there forever. It was perfect, perfect bliss. But then the parent goes, you can't stay. You're not done yet. And I'm like, what? I didn't know what that meant. I'd kind of forgotten all about that there was somewhere else to be besides here, that I couldn't stay. So my reaction was like I was sort of an infant or toddler. I felt like, no. And I felt like, I'm going to show this parent that I am a force to be reckoned with. I am powerful. I am going to, I wished I could kick them in the shins. I felt anger. And then I felt a little something come from them because I was in pitch blackness now. The light was gone. The minute they said, you can't stay, you're not done, it went from light to pitch darkness. And then they said, case closed, and I felt myself drop. And that was really the only time that I felt afraid. I know a lot more about NDEs now. I knew nothing about them then because they didn't exist as far as I was concerned then, but I was passing through different levels as I went from the air to the water to the land to the house to the sun. I was rising in vibration, getting closer to my source. And when the parent said, you can't stay, I had to not only drop back into my body, but drop back into this lower vibration that we're at here. And that does not. It's the opposite of that power rush of going forward. It's like falling into a yucky place. So I saw around me, though, in the blackness, I began to see these little stick figures. They were doing cartwheels. They had these play toys, like a swing set, a teeter-totter, and things like that. And they were playing and laughing and saying these little nonsense things like, how many hippos make a hopscotch? And just little things that were playful. And I got that sense of I'm gonna just watch them. It's not as good as the light, but I'm gonna watch them like this is Saturday morning cartoons or something and just hang. I'm just gonna chill and watch this for eternity. And until I can go back to the light. That was the only thing I cared about, was I'm gonna get back to the light. Then one of them got too close. He kind of zoomed in and he started taking up all of the space like a dinner plate. I couldn't see past him, and he was not saying a very funny rhyme. He was just saying, how many fingers? What is your name? And all of a sudden I realized this horrible, horrible thing. I mean, such a horrible realization that I was back in the meat puppet, back in that whole swamp of stuff that was my life.
Talk about a come down.
Yeah. And that this guy was so clueless that he thought he was separate from me, and he wanted to do that old game where you make noises and send it back and forth. And like, I was like that. I'm so done with that. And it felt like if somebody said, you're going to kindergarten, we're locking you in there, and you're staying for another 16 years. And you can play with blocks, And I just felt like this is so primitive. I can't go back to it. But eventually he was pretty insistent. And so I said 2 for how many fingers. And then I said, Louisa. And I had a feeling of my mouth being way far down there. I was in my brain and my mouth was downstairs, and I was manually making it work from a distance. Because I just wasn't used to being in a body and sending nerve impulses places. I just knew I had to make that thing work. So I did. Anyway, I was lying on the floor in a puddle of sweat. The bartender had been doing the CPR for 3 minutes, and there was a huge crowd of gawkers. Every person in the nightclub was around in a circle, but I had kind of the consciousness of a 5-year-old. I still had a sense of this life as a game. Like, they don't know what happened over there. They think this is real, but this is silly. But I can do this, I thought, so I stood up and we were all going upstairs. I didn't know why we were going up the stairs, but I just was going along with it. My date gave me my purse, and I was like so delighted to see it. I'd forgotten all about it, but instantly I got out a cigarette, started smoking, and back to kind of trying to be cool, but as a 5-year-old, it's hard to describe. And then probably the most shameful part of my story is that the bartender who had saved my life came up and he talked to my date for a bit, and my date acknowledged that he had thought it was hopeless and that he had pretty much told him to stop and just, cover the corpse. Then the bartender came over to me and he said, you were gone for 3 minutes. 22-year-old Louisa just thought, oh my God, he had his mouth on my mouth again and again. I hope he doesn't think I like him or something. So I just kind of was very like cursory, like, yeah, thanks, yeah. And just wanted him to go away, and he did. And I never really thanked him from my heart. I've tried and tried to find him, but I haven't been able since. So I eventually asked my date, what are we waiting for? And he goes, an ambulance. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then I'm like, who's it for? I'm getting this bad feeling. And he's like, it's for you. You were dead. I felt like there was this serious thing that everybody kept referencing that I hadn't experienced at all. So I just said, don't make me go to the hospital. I don't want to go to the hospital. And I was thinking of my parents finding out. They were back home in Seattle and all of this stuff. I just didn't want it. So I said, don't make me go. And then he was a high school teacher at a private school, and he didn't want any cocaine associated with him. So he just grabbed my hand and pulled me to the curb, and there was a whole bunch of taxis waiting there. So we got in one. He said, drive. And all the people came and banged on the back of the taxi. And he said, just go, just go. And I just thought it was funny and a silly game. So there's more about, I got back to the apartment and my roommate, I wanted a drink. They wouldn't let me have one. I went to bed. I woke up and I had bruises all over the backs of my arms, all over the back of my head, and my rib cage was killing me from the CPR. A while after kind of debriefing with my roommate, she asked me, so was that God that was holding you? And to me, that was like saying, was that Bugs Bunny that was holding you? And yet another part of me knew that it had been something greater than this world. So being naturally full of crap, I just kind of laughed and said, yeah, it was God. And just didn't take a stand either way. But then I was alone. I went into the bedroom and closed the door, and I was going to write it all down in my journal, but I was like, is this a trip? I had never heard of an NDE. I had no sense of that, but I could remember certain things like, him saying more real than anything back there, and me knowing it had been more real, and the feeling of the love, and the moment when the parents said, you can't stay. All of these things were still with me, and they were all like preternaturally vivid. They were all better memories than what I had for breakfast this morning. But I believed in the brain as capable of all kinds of things. And I wanted to believe the brain was capable of doing more than people even knew. So I thought, if my heart stopped, as they said, what if my consciousness just went down to one little ember and the only thing that was still there was love? And so since it was the only thing, it felt humongous. And so that's why. And that's what it was. And it was my brain, and it was hypoxia, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it because I'm not going to church. That's what I felt. I felt the only things I had connected to any idea of divinity were very hackneyed religious things, like heaven, and that means you go to church, and that means you become a Christian. I wanted the antithesis of that. I wanted to be a badass, partying, crazy girl. And so I just said, okay, it was a brain thing.
If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please hit that like button and subscribe. Also, if you've enjoyed my content before, or maybe you're new here, but you like it, drop a comment and let me know you're here. I would love to get to know my audience. Thank you for listening, and let's get back to the content. Did you have any experiences in your upbringing that gave you an aversion to Christianity or any sort of a religious group?
My father did. Growing up, my father had Catholicism forced on him, and he was in a small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and everybody went to Catholic church there, and he had to be an altar boy, and the priest was kind of creepy and gave him like big old wet kisses and was not nice to him when he screwed up as an altar boy. He was very smart, and so one of his teachers told him about, hey, Harvard is doing this new thing, it's called a scholarship, you should apply. And he was like, you're crazy, but he did, and he got a scholarship. So he went from a mining town where the only thing you did was go down in the mines to Cambridge. And when he got there, it was like all the religious stuff was from the dark, was from the mines, was from that way of life. And at Harvard, you know, he studied philosophy, and that's where enlightenment was. And it just meant that everything to do with religion was primitive, small-minded superstition. And that's what he taught me.
Okay. I mean, I can see that. I know a lot of people who have been on some level traumatized by religious ritual abuse or even just the legalistic, really intense rules.
That makes it very hard for a lot of people to accept a higher power, is that this sort of religious trauma that they had. But for me, it was more like religion was laughable.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this was in the days of, I don't know if you know, but Billy Graham. You could turn on the TV, and on some channel you could find Billy Graham evangelizing and to huge stadiums full of people. I just felt like, what a bunch of losers. And I just had contempt. So my experience had nothing to do with religion, but I still just did not have another category. It was like, A, you're atheist, or C, you are religious, but there was no room, no B. Like, there's a divinity and it's got nothing to do with religion, which is where I am now.
Well, you didn't have a frame of reference for that
No.
at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would grow up with that perspective.
Mm-hmm. So
So
that was my plan, was to just forget it, just pretend it never happened and keep on doing what I was doing. And then I started having a series of paranormal events happen, and they are told about in my book, a painting that is the cover of my book, and it's me trying to decide between the God voice above me and the laws of Isaac Newton in the book below me. And really, the first two paranormal events were dark ones because I was still drinking. They were seeing a ghost, a very unhappy ghost. I'll just tell it briefly, on the beach at Gloucester, Massachusetts. And he and I were the only ones on this huge empty beach in the middle of a storm. And I saw him from far away. And because I saw him from far away, I was like, those are such cool rain gear things he has on. Oh my God, they look like the real authentic, like Macintosh stuff. Where did he get that? This is in the days of Madonna when vintage clothes were all cool. And so I thought, okay, when I catch up to him, when we cross paths, I'm going to ask him where he got that. When we crossed paths, he didn't look at me. He was staring at the horizon, which wasn't there because it was a storm. And he was very, very upset in his expression. I said, instead of all the things I had planned, I just said, how's it going? He didn't even turn his head to look at me. I saw his eye move a little bit. He was all clearly drank too much, lots of broken capillaries. And he just kind of looked like the Gordon's fish sticks guy, except alcoholic. And he had on black rubber boots. He had the hat. He had all of it. And I went behind him. And then a few steps later, I thought, what an asshole, because he couldn't even say hi. We're the only two people on this beach. So I turned around and he wasn't there. And I went through so many thoughts to try to figure out what had happened. And I first thought maybe he dashed down and jumped into the waves. He was upset because he was suicidal. And I thought, well, his hat will surface, and hat didn't surface. And so I thought, okay, I'm going back and see where he went. And God, I have left tracks. And I went back and there were no tracks except mine. And I had watched this guy for over a minute, well over a minute. So I didn't know what to do with that. When I went back to the place I was staying, then the hostess said, yeah, this is Gloucester. There's a sign at the wharf with 1,000 sailors who drowned. And it's known there are ghosts. But I was like, come on, something's wrong here. It would be like if I just took this cup and let go of it and it stayed there in the air, right? And you
That
and
would
I
be wild.
we saw it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe after like 20 seconds it fell. What would you do with that? You would not know what to do with it. Right?
Yeah, I know.
Like, rules of object permanence broken. And that's how it felt for me. Then the next paranormal event has been very sensitive to my family because it involves a tragedy, in that I knew from the first I heard that my brother, his wife, was expecting a baby. I knew the baby was going to die. And I didn't know how or didn't know why, but I knew the huge sadness that was going to plunge my brother into it. And I couldn't hear about the baby without getting that wave of darkness and pain and loss and tragedy. And it was when I got the news that the baby had died during childbirth, I felt so guilty because instead of just feeling sad, I was so distracted with all this. How did I know? How have I known for months? I knew before the phone rang that what it was going to be, and I didn't know how to explain that.
I've heard a number of people who have had near-death experiences talk about things happening that they knew of beforehand, similar to your experience. What benefit do we have of knowing these things before they happen?
Well,
Like, why?
I believe that we are here to choose love with our free will. And it's not free will if you have the answer key. And so we are kind of got this membrane surrounding us, which I call anti-God. It's the anger that I passed through when I was re-entering my body. I had no reason to want to kick the parent in the shins. I was passing back through this barrier of anger and fear. And that separates us from God. So we can do our own thing and choose through free will. But when you have a near-death experience, it gets damaged. It gets a tear in it or a hole in it. Or Bruce Grayson thinks that it's something in our brains that gets damaged. But I think it is this energetic sheath around us. So things leak in that are there all the time. So time is not actually linear. We just experience it as linear. And so events from the future, namely, not the event. I knew nothing about my nephew's death, but I knew about my brother's intense feeling. It kind of like the shadow of it spilled over into my life. Later, I began reading other people's thoughts. I can tell you more stories about that, but let me just go back to when I had to acknowledge that these weird things were not going away. I continued on my path of alcoholic drinking. I got worse and worse. More than 10 years passed since the NDE, and by the end of my drinking, I had moved to the country so I would be happy, because it was the city making me so unhappy. And I was lonely there and drank even more. And anyway, I drove home from a party with a bunch of the other baristas I worked with and a whole bunch of other quote unquote cool people. And people had taken away my keys because I was so drunk. And I got in the car and just kind of stabbed at where the ignition should be. It took me forever to get the key into the ignition.
That should have been an indicator right there.
Well, I didn't care, right?
Yeah, apparently.
I didn't want to live anymore. So
Yeah.
I didn't think selfishly about who I could kill, but I took off and I drove home, and I lived far from town and down this windy road, and I was bombing along at 80 miles an hour, came to this narrow railroad overpass going over the railroad tracks, and the road got skinnier, and I saw all these reflector signs, and I just thought, I'm just going to shoot for the middle at 80 miles an hour. And I did. Obviously, I went through, and I just thought, woohoo, and I got back to my place and got out of the car. I was too drunk to stand, but I remember very clearly holding myself up with the door, and it was a starry night, and a voice came from the stars and shot through me and into the ground, sort of like lightning. And it said two things. It said, "This is the last time I can help you, and you do know right from wrong." And I felt so much kind of shame, because I had just been saying, man, I'm such a badass when I drive drunk. That's what I had been in the middle of thinking. And this thought came and just slapped me. And I felt like kind of sobered, I guess you would say. I understood that I had been helped, not just this time, but many times. And then this voice, this entity, how embarrassing, had been reading my journal. Because I would write in my journal all this crap about how right and wrong were human-made concepts meant to benefit the system and all of this crap, And he was like, you do know right from wrong in your core, in your heart, And man, did he F up my drinking. I say he because I know him very well now, and his energy is very masculine. He has a name now, Ignacio. But even then, I kind of recognized him as the same voice that had said, more real than anything back there, and you can't stay. He was the one who pulled me. He was the one who was with me. And I got sober. It took me a little more than a month, maybe a month and a half. I got sober on January 29th, 1995, and I haven't had a drink since 29 years.
Good job. So at what point do you feel like you started to accept that this experience was otherworldly and not just the imagination?
Well, you can believe two things at once. I've also spent part of my life as a lesbian, and there was also a lot of shame involved in coming out as an alcoholic. So I knew that I was lesbian long before I let anyone else know. I sensed that I was an alcoholic long before I said the words in an AA meeting. And I knew that this experience had been real, and that the ghost, the foreknowledge, the voice, these things had happened and were real before I was willing to know them in my external life. So it's almost like I would know them if I got quiet, if I got real. But a lot of the time I was just a personality trying to mimic everybody else out there, and I just didn't encounter them much. But eventually it came to a head in that things began happening I took a trip to Greece, and every time when I was newly sober, before I was 100 days sober, when I would get in danger of drinking, something would happen. Someone from AA would show up, or just miraculous things began to happen around that. And then when my sister died from cancer, the voice began to tell me as she was on her deathbed that she was afraid to cross and that I needed to share my experience with her. So I did. And sometime after, because when she first died, I panicked, I ran around and the doctor put the stethoscope on her and said, her heart is still going, but it'll stop when it runs out of oxygen. I wanted to grab that little doctor and just throttle her. I was so furious. Why aren't you trying to save her? Even though I understood she had cancer, she'd hemorrhaged, there was no hope. But then she came to me and I could sense her hovering in the room, and she filled me with the light again. And I was sitting there in this hospital room, not 10 feet from my sister's dead body, with her, more than I had been with her in life, and filled with joy that I just had to fight to keep off my face because everybody else is keening and wailing and in grief, and I'm with her. It was
Wow.
but she also had a message for me for her youngest child that I had to go explain to him because she said no one is going to talk to him. So I did. I went to him and she spoke through me and told him everything that she needed to tell him. But still, I just couldn't communicate it to anybody. I couldn't tell anyone, and I just kept it secret. So things kept happening until after I'd had a baby, my partner was clearly less and less invested in the relationship. I was terrified of spiders. How are these related? Well, I had a dream one night that there was this huge spider. I was at my brother's house with his wife, and this huge spider was in a juniper plant, and somehow I got the nerve in the dream to ask for a glass, and I knocked the spider off and saw it lying on its back at the bottom of the glass, showing me that its belly was covered with this beautiful pattern of interlocking triangles / diamonds. And I got the message, like diamonds of orderly precision, even on something as trifling or unimportant as a spider's belly. So in the morning, I tell my partner all about this, and I'm trying to get ready to get this binder to the toddler co-op mom who's supposed to have it, and I'm just about to leave. Got the diaper bag, I've got the snacks and all the things that you have when you have a toddler. It's impossible to leave the house. It's really difficult, but I just was grabbing my keys, and I looked in the other room on the ceiling above where I sat to write when I used to write. And there was this thing like a black ping pong ball. I'm like, what the heck? What is that huge black thing? So I get closer and I look, and it's like the biggest spider I've ever seen, with its legs all drawn in. So it looks like a ball. And so I tell my son, okay, we're not going just now. And I think I was brave in the dream, so I can be brave now. And I'm thinking that's kind of weird. But I had a kind of communication with the spider. I kind of thought to it, why are you in this obvious spot right above where I sit to write? And the spider sent back to me, I'm here for you. You know why. And I sure as heck didn't know why. But I got it in a glass, and then I put the cover on, and then I ran out. I thought this thing's way too big to drop in my yard. I want it farther away. So I ran to the neighbor's house, and I flung it into this bush that just happened to be a juniper bush, just like in the dream.
Oh, wow.
Spider do, but it just lies there on its back, and it shows me its belly, and there are those interlocking triangles, diamonds. There is the very same pattern from the dream, and then comes the thought, diamonds of orderly precision, even in something so lowly as the belly of a spider. So again, I didn't know WTF to think. I'm looking up and down the street. I'm like, somebody's playing games with my brain. This is crazy. How can this cannot happen? So a year goes by, and I find myself driving all the way across Seattle to a friend's house for her birthday when I haven't seen this person in a year, and I'm the only person with a kid. And I'm like, why am I going? I don't know, but I need to go. So I go to this party, Somehow clairvoyance comes up. Somehow I tell the story. And this friend is the most woo-woo woman I know. She's like the queen of woo-woo. And she says that was a spirit messenger. I'm like, what? And I'm in my external persona where I don't believe in anything, right? I'm like, what? I'm kind of embarrassed for her. She gets out this book and starts reading, and she says, isn't that when your partner left you? And I'm like, no, it's not. And then I think later, it's when I didn't know she had left me. It's when she began the affair with the other woman. And then she said, spider is also a totem animal for writers. And I just left and I thought, oh man, she's crazy. But more and more things I started thinking of on the drive home. And when I got home, I Googled, and it said spider comes to cut the threads of your life when one phase is ending and a new one's beginning. So the dream had been set when I first got with my partner. I was staying with my brother and my wife when I first met her. And then the end had come when she began making overtures to this other woman. And then I Googled spider totem, and it's this totem for writers because the alphabet and the webs or something like that. And I had stopped writing because this woman was so demanding of my energy. I had not written, oh my gosh, since I'd been with her. And I looked up at the ceiling where the spider had been, and it kind of like opened, not visually, but like I could see past it. And I felt the universe around me in a way that I can't describe. And I felt that presence, that masculine voice with me. And I just said, you're here. I will never doubt you again. And he chuckled, he laughed. Because I'm like in this apex of dramatic realization. He goes, yes, little one, we're real and we can do real stuff. That's what he said. And in my book, I compare it to like if somebody pulled the bag off a jar of peanut butter and you were like, oh, it's peanut butter. Real peanut butter. Oh my God, it was there under the bag. And like, yeah. Like what? And so anyway, he was amused, but I swore to him that I would never doubt him again. So from that point on, and that was in 2004 or 5, when I can't remember exactly when the thing happened with the woo-woo friend, I never doubted it in here again. But it took me until I'd read minds a bunch of times. I'd known the future a bunch of times. And then I finally read my good friend's thoughts while he was lusting after his wife, after they'd taken a weekend away without the kids. I pulled into Home Depot. I get this image of my friend's wife naked on a bed. I'm like, why am I thinking this?
Oh no.
I go into Home Depot and run into him right in front of the paint department. I'm like, oh, how are you? And he goes, oh, wow, we just took the kids to grandma's. We got a bed and breakfast. And he just goes, it was much needed. And I felt like saying, yeah, who knew your wife was such a babe, man? And I didn't say anything. But I got home and I was like, I can't be the only person this stuff happens to. I knew it had something to do with the NDE. I knew that it had been a series of things, after effects from that. And by then I had heard the word NDE. I had heard it. This was 2011, and I'd heard a show on NPR interviewing Jeff Long about near-death experiences, and I'd heard of a book, and so I found a local chapter of Seattle Ions and became the woo-woo I am today.
I love that. Became the woo-woo I am today.
Well, and then more and more weird stuff kept happening after that too, but by then I was no longer isolated.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you didn't get a choice. And I know that a lot of near-death experiencers, they have a choice to come back. Some people are directly given a choice, but you did not have a choice. Have you thought a lot about why?
My angel saved me twice. So the first time he sent me back, I had done nothing with my life but get A's in freaking college. Like I had done nothing. I didn't know how to love people. You know, I had not at all discovered my powers for love. He sent me back and I did nothing. I got worse. I got sicker. right? So that moment when he said, this is the last time I can help you, you do know right from wrong, that was the moment where he was saying, this is your life and you can F it up, or you can follow that compass of right and wrong and build it and make it better. And he led me to AA. That the first woman that I got with, she was sober in AA, and that's how I found it. God speaks through people who are sober, and you feel the love from people who want you to get well. And it was kind of like I had the AA 12 steps and those principles on the one hand, and I got advice from Ignacio on the other hand. And by putting them together, I have grown to the point where I could help people. And that was the potential he didn't want to waste. I have a blog on alcoholism that I've been writing since 2013. And it gets 100 hits a day. That's not a lot, but I never advertise it, but it helps alcoholics. I have sponsored, 50 women who are out there in the world sober. And there were times I didn't want to. I'd be like, she's crazy, man. And Ignacio would be like, oh, and you weren't?
Yeah, I was going to say, that was like your goal.
I know. So he would kind of push me to do the right thing. And he still does. I mean, there are times when I personally am feeling like chicken shit, like I am feeling I can't speak honestly to this person. And it was like when my ex-boyfriend, I called him and I said to him, sweetheart, you're dying of alcoholism. I don't know how I got that. And then he said, everybody dies. And I said, but to die before you're 60 is a waste of life. And I am not that direct. But Ignacio kind of was pushing me. And it turns out, he died of alcoholism this past summer. And I know that I said the best I could to him. I know that I did not hold back.
That's all you can do.
I'm sad. And he has come to me, and because he had a lot to say to me, and I can hear stuff like that too now. But I think that why I was brought back was because I was given a lot of potential to help people, and I had not discovered it.
Right. Like that was the purpose of you coming here in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and it's like, if you make an impact on one person, if you change one person's life for the better, the ripple effects of that go out and impact so many people, I'm so glad that you made it back and that you've...
Because I'm so happy now. I mean, 29 years of sobriety, I am more comfy in my skin now than alcohol could ever make me.
Alcohol is a depressant.
It is, but even if I talk about the cocaine, I feel more whole than I did when I was high. I feel more high than I did when I was high. I love life,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm between relationships for about 5 years now, and I've just learned how to love myself, which is such a cliche, but dude, that is the hardest thing. And I'm kind of scared to get in relationships because I still have codependency. It's like as soon as I'm in a relationship, it's all about them, right? And right now, I'm really digging going beautiful places with me or with my friends and not getting focused on illusions of trying to please the other person.
It really is. Yeah. No, I've been on that wave as well for quite a while now. And it's amazing. Like once you find that peace within yourself, that fulfillment, that satisfaction in your own space with that open heart to life and experiences, it's hard to want to get into a scenario with another person that's going to create that dynamic of dependence. Then at that point, you have to consider somebody else's happiness. You have to consider their needs, and also the intoxication of that chemistry is so easy to lose yourself in.
It is, and it can become a drug, right?
It is a drug, oxytocin.
I know. Like I said, it was like a cocaine factory for me, infatuation was. But I love what one of my friends, she's sober in AA in Hawaii, and we still talk on the phone a lot. She said, well, I have the dating apps and sometimes I'll go for coffee, but the men aren't competing with each other. They're competing with how awesome I feel when I'm alone.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's like if you can enhance my life,
Right,
that's
right.
yeah. Yeah, and I feel like this is something that is collectively being picked up. I
Yeah.
feel like societally, we are waking up. Actually, just recently, I followed a group on Instagram where they orchestrate parties where everybody is sober. There's no
Yeah.
alcohol, there's no drugs. It's just
I used to have huge parties, and I'm going to have one because I'm moving pretty soon. I have huge parties. We dance, we get crazy. There is no alcohol or drugs
we
anywhere.
don't need it.
When you see the pictures of us at these parties, you would think we were wasted because we're laughing so hard and we're hugging each other and we're in that state of connection that people used to have to get, drunk to feel, right? We are feeling it. So I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I also think that being single is different than it used to be. It really used to be like, oh, I'm a spinster, right? I'm like 63 and I'm not with anybody. If I meet somebody now, they have to really, really be worth it because I'm pretty close to the point where any dude I get with is going to need care.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be specific, but I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to be draining myself for that, for somebody else. I'm still climbing mountains. I am having a ball. I don't want to get with someone who's gonna, age
And
faster than I. Let's
and
just
the
say,
and the beauty of that is that you don't have to.
yeah.
And society at this point has got to where that's not expected. I'm 30 years old. Generations before, it's like, oh, if you're not married by the time you're 30, you're like a useless woman, no longer marketable. And it's just like, no, no,
I
not
think
anymore.
that it's hopeful that society is growing, is getting wiser, over time. When you think about how fast things are changing, people are alarmed at how fast gender is changing. But gender has been such an artificial structure imposed on humans it's just not meant to be like that. We're people first, right? And so we're breaking through all that really fast. We kind of lost with it. Internet happened so fast. We don't know how to tell what's real from what's false. We're kind of lost with that. But we know now that people anywhere in the world are as real as we are. We can't hate anybody. My mom said in World War II, she felt the Japanese were not fully human. She felt there was something alien and insect-like about them. Okay? We can't.
That's just propaganda.
But it's also that you didn't see people talking and in their homes and with their babies and, going for walks and with their pets and all the things that you can see online now to say, oh my gosh, we're all the same. Even if the government, in Iran or Russia or wherever may not be very cool, the people are just like we are. So
Even the government, even the people in power, duality is an illusion. The fact that we're all just operating these vessels and under the illusion that there's separateness.
some people are more separate than others. They are more, what do I want to say, misguided by the ego.
You're not wrong. Yeah, no, that's true. That's
Hey,
true.
can I talk a little bit about my book?
Yeah. Yeah, tell me about it.
It just tells the story. For each weird thing, I present it twice. First, as I experienced it then, when I had no idea what was happening. And now reflecting back on it, and I use material from the interviews I've done with NDEers that parallels my experience. So it takes you from the NDE to present day.
So, what do you mean parallels your experience?
Like if somebody experienced the same thing that I did, it's quoted in there. And I'm just talking about the phenomenon of seeing ghosts or the phenomenon of knowing the future. And I will put in another person's experience with the same thing.
Right. And kind of how you've integrated your understanding.
Yeah, because the point of the book is that I'm just normal, that tons of people have these NDEs. Like one of the reviewers said, this is not like any other NDE book because, for one thing, it's called From NDE Denier to Full-On Woo-Woo Against My Will. Not a lot of books in NDEs use the word woo-woo.
That's a great title.
Well, and it's because, like I said before, these parallels in my life, I can say when I was gay, I would use the word dyke. When I am alcoholic and we use the word drunks, and it's different. It's not pejorative once you own it. And so I own woo-woo. Call me a woo-woo, fine.
Not offended.
Right. I am, and I'm proud. So yeah, that's what the book is.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I'm actually quite interested. Ned recommends your book.
He texts me while he's reading it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. So if you had one takeaway, one thing that you learned that was the most profound, that was something that you would like to share with the world, a mission statement per se, what would that be?
You do know right from wrong. And what I mean by that is that
That gave me chills.
our culture is saying, be like this, buy this, do this. Here's what's cool. Here's how you should. And you have to find that inner tuning fork of what is true for you and follow that. And that will lead you to love. That will lead you to service. You will know that money and stuff is not why you're here. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for spending time with me today.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you loved this episode, please consider leaving a review. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so we don't lose each other. And to share the link with somebody who can appreciate this message. Blessings to you all, and I hope to catch you on my next episode.